Shana Tova. If I had to print out all the different versions of this sermon I've composed in the last few days, Mishkan Or would have no computer paper for the next year and a half. With world events unraveling so quickly each day, each hour brought on new information and different messaging. And with yesterday's attack on Israel of over 182 ballistic missiles, I was almost at a loss for words. I know I am not alone in feeling the excruciating pain of the last year. I can't believe I'm giving this kind of sermon again. Just 1 year ago, I stood on this very bima, sharing my concern around Israel's judicial system becoming overhauled, what felt like a threat to Israeli democracy. I was worried then that it felt like we were becoming a people divided. And to quote a few lines from that sermon from last Rosh Hashana, I said, "Today, more than ever, I feel like I have to offer words about Israel, our tiny country in the Middle East, the place that we all take pride in saying is the only Jewish democracy in the world, is in need of our support. The rift in our global Jewish society is grabbing the wrong kind of attention. Countries like Iran are watching what is happening in Israel very closely, as are the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Hezbollah, and Hamas. If only I had known then what I know now." This year has been a brutal year for the Jewish people, and I await for October 8th to come, but we aren't there yet. Each year we gather to do the avodah, the work that is required of us on our high holy days, our days of awe that are overwhelming in their intensity. And we do this with smaller bursts on Shabbat and holidays because we know that memory is short and we get swept up in the everyday, task-oriented life that stretches us thin. We chant the same poetic verses that our ancestors have asked for generations: who will live and who will die, not as metaphorical abstractions, but as very real questions. Just like them, we have the terrifying invitation to open our higher selves when we hear the call, a call that begins with the sounding of the shofar. Our auditory reminded to be shaken up, to be alert, to awaken from our dormant state of routine and confront our realities, especially those that we set aside throughout the year because they're just too painful to burst open. For those of us who are living on Rosh Hashana, our moment of renewal, I appeal to you today to contend with the reality that we, American Jews, live in a different world now, where the security blanket has been removed and we must now rethink our approach to being Jewish. We must become refortified and approach the world as we know it differently. 360 days ago today, 1,200 Israelis of various faiths and backgrounds were murdered, many of them in their own homes, in their most vulnerable places, their beds or their breakfast tables. Another approximately 370 young people killed at a music festival. Young people doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing, celebrating life, rejoicing in their youth. And we closely hold in our hearts the 251 individuals who were kidnapped, Israelis and citizens of varying countries who were taken by the terrorist organization Hamas, and 101 of them still remaining in captivity in dark tunnels, being starved and tortured. Yes, this is the heavy load we are all carrying with us while much of the world continues on. The pain is too great to shoulder in every moment of every day, and the agony is gut-wrenching, and we are mere humans. How long can we hold our breath? This is a question only the hostage families can really answer. And we do our best to hold them in these moments because this ripple of destruction creates seismic waves. 2 weeks ago, our synagogue had the wonderful privilege of hosting 8 survivors of the October 7th attack. These young moms, Amit, Ofir, Mika, Batsheva, Naama, Noah, Taya, and Sapir, shared their harrowing stories with us. 11 months later, they are still in survivor mode. They have been displaced from Kibbutz Sufa for an undetermined amount of time and don't know when or if they will ever be able to return. For Noah Chubara, this journey has been particularly difficult, as she is now trying to redefine herself as a person, having lost her husband, Ido, on October 7th, who went to rescue as many kibbutz members as possible and lost his life trying to defend his home and his children. Ido's sister, Naama, who was also here among the 8 young mothers, tries to re-envision a world without him. Ido's father and an MDA medic, Zohar, held his son in his last moments, trying to stop the bleeding from the gunshot wound to his son's head, and he was unable to do so. Our 8 visitors recounted the Israeli families who had to hold the door to their safe room closed because there was no lock on the inside. These safe rooms were meant to withstand the normal bombs that are launched from the Gaza Strip, not push out the tirade of terrorists flooding their homes with grenades and M16s. We are the generation who witnessed the horror of October 7th. Some of us able to stomach the gruesome video footage more than others. And as the rest of the world's empathy faded quickly, we saw the adverse outcomes it continues to have on global Jewry. We cannot afford to be spectators or to sit idly by. October 6th, 2023 was the last day of the Jewish experience we've known for the last few decades. Transforming ourselves is something we've experienced often. We have been here before. Our new world calls us to contend with the misguided defamations about Jewish people that continue to circulate and are causing paramount harm to our community. The people who are getting hit hardest are our young people, those especially on college campuses who are trying to have a normal education experience. Jewish hatred has ancient roots and has resurfaced, taking on a new face, which demands our immediate attention. This is our shared responsibility. This work is a marathon, it is not a sprint. Author and journalist Mati Friedman helps us take a closer look at ourselves as we reflect upon the last 11 months. He points out to a recurring narrative that he has seen in the United States, as he himself is an American. He argues that many Americans are using their image of home, the image of the United States, American issues, to construct their image of Israel. He brings to our attention that some confuse the conflict between Jews and Muslims in the Middle East is jumbled up with American ideas about race. He's worried that we're taking our own problems in this country and superimposing them on Israeli society. Westerners, he argues, peer out in the world, but what they're really looking for is a mirror. The story of the Jewish minority in Europe and in the Islamic world, which is the story of Israel, has nothing to do with race in America. In Israel, the issue of white people versus brown or black people does not carry the same history or challenges as it does here in America. Let me pause for a moment and ask you a question. Who in this space is an Ashkenazi Jew? Raise your hand for me. An Ashkenazi Jew is one whose family lived in France, Central and Eastern Europe, including Germany and Poland and Russia. Now, please raise your hand if you're a Mizrahi Jew. Okay, cool, just me. Oh, somebody in the sound room? You're a Mizrahi Jew? Oh, I can't wait to talk to you. It's just you and me. A Mizrahi Jew is a Jewish person who comes from Middle Eastern ancestry, dating back from late antiquity between the 2nd and 8th century of the Common Era. Their communities were in Babylon, which is today modern-day Iraq, and Persia, which is today modern-day Iran or Yemen. If you look at passerbys on the streets of Israel, you probably won't know who is Jewish and who is Muslim, as 53% of Jewish Israelis are of Mizrahi descent, not Ashkenazi. They are Arab Jews, like myself. My mother was born and raised in the Milah, which is the ghetto of Rabat, Morocco, and my father in Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia. I am an Arab Jew. So the notion that this is a war against a colonialist entity versus an indigenous one is not only false, but yet another form of distorted Jewish hatred. Friedman offers us an example as well. In 2019, the New York Times published an op-ed by the respected scholar Michelle Alexander, the author of an important book on incarceration, that described Israel's conflict with the Palestinians as one of the great moral challenges of our time, where she describes Israeli society as having practices reminiscent of apartheid in South Africa and Jim Crow segregation in the United States. For these kinds of American writers, Jews living in a distant Middle East have become an embodiment of American evil, racial oppression. Jews are displayed as the prime symbol of whatever is wrong in our country. Western observers, Friedman points out, are often tempted to see foreign countries as mirrors of their own because it makes a story more compelling for members of their audience who are interested in mostly themselves. Who isn't? This means they can analyze other societies without going to the considerable trouble of studying the regions, learning their language, understanding their society, their values, or even visiting. Israel is a small country in the Middle East that has nothing to do with the challenges troubling America. You've seen these individuals at the rallies holding up the signs that read, "Zionism is racism." Zionism is very simply the movement for the self-determination and statehood for the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. Its purpose was to re-establish a Jewish nation as a solution to the anti-Semitism Jews faced in Europe and other Middle Eastern countries where Jews were residing. And after 1948, until today, Zionism became a reality, a homeland not only for persecuted European Jews, but for Jews all over the globe, including Jews fleeing persecution from the Soviet Union, the Arab world, Turkey, Iran, and Ethiopia, among many others. Israel is one of the most diverse countries in the world, with over half of its population being from Africa, India, and other areas of the Middle East. Saying that Zionism is racism, a phrase which itself is a racist and religious distortion, conveys that the Jewish people, unlike all other people in the world, do not have the right to self-determination. And moreover, it fundamentally undermines Jewish diversity and identity. And since the establishment of Israel, this small nation has had problems and complications of their own that are linked to a totally different history, not one of apartheid, genocide, or colonization. Jews have always had a connection to Israel, evidenced by the Torah, historical and archaeological findings that have demonstrated a deeply rooted indigenous people to that land. To remove that part of history is to alter reality and completely ignore our history, while rewriting a narrative that is both false and harmful. These sweeping overgeneralizations, assumptions, and distortions of truth are not only a form of Jewish hatred, but feeding into the lies that are told by terrorist organizations. Many people in the world are currently being fueled by distorted fabrications that are leading to hate and to violence. On September 11th, just a few weeks ago, Yosef Haddad spoke at the Austrian parliament to 20 countries to remind them that Israeli hostages, regular people, 3 of which were Austrian citizens, children, elderly, mothers, are still in captivity. If you've never heard Haddad speak, please take the time to do so. Haddad is an inspiring Arab-Israeli journalist who has become an impactful activist for his country, Israel. He, like many Christian Arab Israelis, grew up in Israel. He served in the IDF, became a commander, and fought in several wars defending Israel. His tremendous outreach to the Arab world, mostly in Arabic, has been so impactful in trying to dispel the lies that are deeply infused in some Muslim countries about Jews and Israeli society. In his speech to the Austrian parliament, Haddad disputes the absurd notion that Israel is an apartheid state. 20% of the Israeli population are Arab Muslims, he says, and 30% of Israeli society are Arab doctors and pharmacists. Arabs in Israel are members of the Knesset, of the parliament, IDF commanders, journalists, academics, athletes who represent Israel, musicians, Supreme Court justices like Salim Jubran, who put a Jewish president and prime minister in jail. Israel is fraught with her own unique domestic concerns, just like any other country. She does not need to inherit imposed struggles from other countries that have nothing to do with Israel or her history. The idea that the war in Israel is a racist one between brown people and white people is not only false, but it also insinuates that all Israelis are white. And this narrative is bigoted and eliminates Israel's very rich tapestry of diverse faiths and backgrounds, including my own. In his closing remarks, Haddad does not mince his words. He asserts that this conflict is not between Arabs and Jews. It's not even about land. It has everything to do with obsessive, genocidal, supremacist ideology, steeped in anti-Semitism that seeks to eliminate the state of Israel, the United States, and Europe as well. He summons the members of the Austrian parliament to become more closely acquainted with the factual reality of the region and urges them to ask the very real questions that are clouding their judgment, to ask about Hamas ideology. Added to that, recent threats from Hezbollah in Lebanon as well. Hamas is a terrorist organization ruling the Gaza Strip, funded by Iran and Qatar, and prides itself on armed resistance against Israel's civilians and rejects Israel's right to exist on any border, even prior to October 7th, where they have continuously fired thousands of rockets at Israel, and each of them a war crime, using their own people as martyrs who get rewarded every time they cause any kind of meaningful injury to Israel. And the training of martyrdom for organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah begins at the age of 4 years old. I turn to our tradition for comfort and guidance. Just moments ago, we chanted the Avinu Malkeinu, our supplication, our plea to God that commits us to a special devotion and brings us closer to our roots and our faith in God. We say, Kotvenu besefer chaim, inscribe us in the book of life. These are not just words, melodies that we chant. How do we want to be written in the book of life? Chotmenu besefer hachaim. How do we want to be sealed? What does the stamp of our legacy look like for our time on this earth? And what do we want to leave for the next generation? On Passover, we always talk about the wicked son as being the worst child. But honestly, the wicked son is not even my biggest worry. My greatest concern is the fifth son, the one who doesn't show up. My biggest fear is that we will leave the next generation with nothing substantive for them to sink their roots into. Chadesh aleinu shana tova. Renew for us a good year. What sense of renewal do we want to experience in this coming year so we can begin to see the light and peace that we are all so desperately seeking? Rabbi Danny Gordis says that Israeli and American Jews were smacked hard by history this past year. Having a Jewish state, he reminds us, meant that we were done hiding, done being murdered and tortured. We were supposed to bend the arc of Jewish history differently. And as American Jews, we thought we could dodge it. We're too far away and it could never happen here. Israel and America are deeply changed places for us. Gordis asks us and himself, what do we as American Jews need to learn? What do we need to study, to read, to understand in order to have a sense of what Jews and our tradition still bring to the world? What did the Jews and do the Jews have to say that mattered in the past and in our present? Can our children say something meaningful about why we matter? How do we become the most Jewishly literate generation of all time? And this is why we gather on the holidays, including those who are joining us on the live stream, to connect, to reconnect to ourselves and a greater aspiration. Where have we done well? And where have we missed the mark? Is the next generation able to carry the baton of our tradition? Have we impassioned them enough? Have we created enough for them? Have we educated them enough? Have we done any of those things for ourselves in order to empower them? To put it plainly, we need to step it up. We must remove the veils of comfort and begin the very real work of fighting Jewish hatred, misinformation, and anti-Zionism, starting in our own homes. Our Jewish growth and support for Israel are not partisan issues, nor are they political ones. Whomever you vote for is your business. Moreover, I invite all of us, to move away from judging others based on their vote, and rather do the much harder work of building bridges of commonality. Unity brings strength. Divided we fall, and we cannot afford any more rifts. The next generation needs us. They are taking our cues, listening to our conversations, and we must lead by example. If we look back at the rabbis whose legacy we stand on today, we see the strength of Zionism coursing through the veins of our community. Rabbi Abba Hillel Silver preached in this very space about the importance of having a connection to Israel and became a global American representative advocating for the creation of a return to our homeland. Rabbi Arthur Lelyveld, who has been on many occasions called a rights crusader, dedicated himself full-time to the Zionist cause, where he campaigned across the country against a remnant of Jewish anti-Zionists who oppose the creation of the Jewish state. My friends, we must continue the intergenerational work of our rabbis, not for them, for us. We are the privileged generation who bears witness to an ancient calling for a return to the Holy Land. We are part of the story that will determine the future of Israel and the future of the Jewish people. We must wake up to this honored responsibility. Going from oppressed minority to democratic majority is a calling for us all. Being Jewish isn't something we do, it's who we are. And part of that identity includes our connection to Israel. We must continue to visit Israel in her hardest time to say we are here. Our sisters from Kibbutz Sufa need to know that we are them for their continuously, not just for 1 week in September. We must educate our young people alongside our adults and become the most Jewishly literate generation of our time, of all time. We must call out those who are causing harm to Israel, the Jewish people, and strengthen the unbreakable bond the Jewish people have to the Jewish state. May we be blessed with strengthened unity, resilience, and self-determination. Lihiyot am chofshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion ve'Yerushalayim. To be a free people in our land, in Zion and Jerusalem. Kulanu am echad. We are one people.
ללא מילים, ללא תחושות, אין מנוס ממחשבות, יש פה קרע לא מוסבר, איך שרים כשהלב נשבר, אני פה מול החדשות, לא מעכל את הדמעות, אם אנחנו הנבחר, נחרד גורל אכזר ואין תשובות ערפל כבד נחת עכשיו לא מי פונים הנשמה פצועה בקרב שמע ישראל אומרים יחדיו עוד לא עבדה תקוותנו להיות חופשי בארצנו שמע ישראל כולנו עם אחד עוד לא עבדה תקוותנו להיות חופשי בארצנו שמע ישראל כולנו עם אחד בארצנו שמע ישראל כולנו עם אחד עם אחד עם אחד עם אחד כולנו עם אחד עוד לא עבדה תקוותנו להיות חופשי